Good morning, folks. Welcome back to the Food for the Faithful channel with me, Bill Reimer, your reluctant prophet. I have some things to share with you this morning that might cause you to be reluctant to hear them. Nevertheless, I'll attempt to prove my case. I've noticed that with all of the kickback after poor Charlie Kirk's martyrdom, that Catholicism, high church religion, is being promoted as a solution to social collectivist tyranny. Here's the reason I mistrust that. And its rejection of individual salvation in favor of some unbiblical form of collective salvation. Or worse, I'm hearing learned men, people like Dr. Gad Saad and Dr. Jordan Peterson, talking about the necessity of Judeo-Christian ethics as a foundation for civil society without ever discussing conversion. Christianity flows from having a conversion experience. You can't have the one without the other. So, in fact, they're contradicting themselves. They talk about Christianity in the abstract. So my concern is that there's far too much talk of the importance of Catholic Christianity as an antidote to the woke globalist agenda, but nothing could be further from the truth, and I mean the truth of the Scriptures. No one stands between man and God but Christ alone. Certainly not a priesthood ordained by the institutions of men. So permit me to explain how I have come to these conclusions. Next subtitle is How the Protestant Reformation Became an Agent of Economic Freedom and Social Change. Protestant Europe's greater economic success compared to the Mediterranean South stems from a complex interplay of historical, cultural, and institutional factors. Here are the key reasons that scholars have identified. 1. Literacy and education. The Protestant Reformation emphasized personal Bible reading, which drove widespread literacy and education reforms. Protestant regions invested heavily in schooling, boosting human capital and labor productivity. Work ethic and entrepreneurship. Max Weber famously linked Protestantism, especially Calvinism, with a Protestant work ethic that valued hard work, thrift, and discipline. This ethic encouraged entrepreneurship, innovation, and long-term investment. 3. Institutional and legal reforms. Protestant areas often develop more inclusive institutions, promoting civil liberties, property rights, and rule of law. These institutions fostered business competition and economic dynamism. 4. Religious freedom and exchange of ideas. Protestant regions broke the Catholic Church's monopoly, allowing for freer exchange of ideas, press, and assembly. This openness catalyzed technological innovation and economic growth. 5. Counter-Reformation constraints. In contrast, Catholic Mediterranean countries were shaped by the Counter-Reformation, which reinforced centralized religious authority and discouraged dissent. This often led to intellectual conservatism and slower adaptation to modern economic practices. Shortly, we're going to find out how this relates to Canada, and particularly to the province of Quebec. 6. Global focus versus domestic development. Catholic powers, such as Spain and Portugal, focused heavily on their overseas empires, sometimes at the expense of domestic economic development. Protestant countries, lacking vast colonies early on, invested more in internal infrastructure, and industry. Next subtitle, Roman Catholicism and the rise of feudalism. The power vacuum of post-Rome Europe. After the Western Roman Empire collapsed, bishops and abbots stepped into roles once held by civil governors. They managed roads, collected taxes, and maintained local order, filling the administrative void left by Rome's fall. This set the stage for a system where landowners, secular and ecclesiastical, wielded both power, temporal and spiritual. Church landholdings and feudal contracts. The church amassed vast estates across Europe, at times controlling up to 1/3 of all arable land. To defend and cultivate these lands, ecclesiastical lords granted parcels to knights in return for military service and loyalty. These arrangements mirrored and reinforced classic feudal bond between lord and vassal. Ecclesiastical hierarchies as feudal lords. Many high-ranking clerics held dual titles, such as bishop lords or abbot landers. They levied rents, enforced local justice, and mobilized peasant labor. By adopting feudal practices themselves, church leaders embedded the system into the very fabric of medieval society. Moral and ideological legitimization. Priests and monks preached that social order reflected divine will, portraying oaths of fealty as sacred pledges before God. Papal rulings and church councils regularly upheld the rights of lords over vassals and serfs, giving spiritual cover to feudal obligations and hierarchies. In other words, giving spiritual cover to tyranny. Education, record-keeping, and legal continuity. Monasteries preserved Roman law codes, known as civil law, and administrative manuals. By the way, Quebec has civil law. Still. So, Roman law codes and administrative manuals training clerks who later served in feudal courts. Cathedral schools maintained literacy and record-keeping, ensuring that charters, land grants, and legal disputes all followed a common framework, further cementing feudal structures. Although Roman Catholicism did not invent socialism, its landed wealth, bureaucratic apparatus, and moral authority were key to feudalism's adaptation and longevity across medieval Europe that wasn't broken until the Protestant Reformation. So now we're going to discuss how England fell under feudal tyranny. William the Conqueror's imposition of tyranny and feudalism on England is this subtitle: Pre-Conquest Anglo-Saxon Freedoms before 1066. English society was built on customary land rights and local governance. Free peasants held land by inheritance or local agreement, and legal disputes were settled in shire and hundred courts. The king's power was balanced by the Witan, a council of nobles and local earls who protected community liberties. Military conquest and crown monopoly of land. After defeating Harold at Hastings and his coronation on Christmas Day of 1066, William declared that all English land belonged to the crown. He kept roughly 1/5 for himself, granted 1/4 to the church, and parceled out the remainder to about 170 Norman tenants-in-chief in proportion to their service. This unilateral redistribution eradicated the Anglo-Saxon landowning class and solidified Norman rule. Formalization of feudal bonds. William introduced a rigid hierarchy based on land for service. King, ultimate authority. Tenants-in-chief, who were the barons and bishops, received large fiefs in exchange for providing knights. Knights held manors and swore fealty to barons, then to the king. villeins and serfs bound to the manor, owing labor and dues. Each grant was sealed by a homage ceremony, kneeling bareheaded, hands clasped, an oath sworn upon a holy relic to ensure lifelong loyalty. Castle building and military control. To enforce his new order, William and his barons erected Mont and Bailey castles across key locations. These fortifications served as military strongpoints, administrative centers, and psychological deterrents against rebellion. By 1087, hundreds of these castles dotted the landscape, ensuring Norman dominance even in remote regions. Tyrannical reprisals and the harrying of the North. This is where my own people came from Yorkshire. Resistance met ruthless suppression. In late 1066, and again during the uprisings of 1069 to 70, William's forces burned villages, slaughtered livestock, and laid waste to farmland in Yorkshire and beyond. This harrying of the North caused widespread famine and displacement, breaking the spirit of any remaining Anglo-Saxon opposition. Doomsday Survey, an administrative overhaul. In 1086, William commissioned the Doomsday Book, a comprehensive survey of landholdings, resources, and taxable value across England. This unprecedented record allowed the Crown to extract taxes with precision and to revoke fiefs from disloyal lords, cementing financial control and curtailing noble autonomy. Erosion of local liberties and legal traditions. Norman law replaced many Anglo-Saxon customs. Forest laws restricted peasant access to woodlands and game. Murdrum fines penalized communities for the death of a Norman lord, and the witan was supplanted by the king's curia regis. Freeholders became tenants who needed royal or baronial consent to sell or bequeath land, erasing centuries of local freedoms. William's reforms transformed England from a network of free communities into a tightly controlled feudal monarchy. His strategies of land confiscation, castle erection, and harsh reprisals ensured that all power flowed upward, from serf to knight, baron to king, where once it had been dispersed among many. Feudalism in North America. Next subtitle: The Seigneurial System of New France. Origin and definitions. The seigneurial system was a land tenure framework introduced in New France, now Quebec, in 1627, and rooted in French semi-feudal tradition. All territorial claims nominally belonged to the French king, who granted vast manorial estates, or seigneuries, to seigneurs in exchange for developing the colony. Although inspired by European feudalism, it adapted to North American realities, emphasizing settlement over purely aristocratic privilege. Land distribution and lot layout. Seigneuries were typically about 1 times 3 leagues, which is roughly 5 times 15 kilometers, and subdivided into narrow, long river lots or rangs averaging 3 by 30 arpents. This design maximized access to waterways, the main transportation arteries, and fostered neighborly interaction. The Crown or the company of 100 associates parceled fiefs along rivers, then seigneurs conceded lots to habitants who pledged to bring the land into cultivation within a set time framework. Seigneurs' rights and responsibilities. Each seigneur held both onerous and honorary rights secured by a notarized concession act. He was obliged to build and maintain a grist mill, preside over a local court, and ensure communal infrastructure. In return, seigneurs collected cens, which is a symbolic feudal tithe, renta, fixed cash or in-kind rent, banalités, mill use fees, hunting, fishing, and timber licenses. By the early 18th century, seigneurs also claimed several days of corvée labor annually. Habitant, obligations, and status. Habitant, you see this on the can of pea soup, still called habitant soup. Habitant, the tenant farmers, held freehold-style rights within their concessions, paying fixed rents that did not adjust for inflation or time. They were free to cultivate and profit from their plot, subject to grinding grain at the seigneur's mill, performing corvée work when required, respecting restrictions on resale or subletting without seigneurial consent. The blend of freedom and obligation distinguished New France's system from full feudal serfdom. Administration and legal framework. The French crown regulated seigneurial tenures by law, stipulating that land be cleared within a given period or revert to the seigneur. The Company of 100 Associates sub-infeudated most of its territory, expecting it to be peopled by 4,000 settlers over 15 years. Concession contains contracts detailed mutual obligations, preserving Roman-derived or civil law legal continuity and ensuring systemic colonization. So most of Quebec, all French Canadians, were descended from those 4,000 settlers. Abolition and enduring legacy. Under British rule, the seigneurial system persisted until the Feudal Abolition Act of 1854 converted all tenure to freehold. Although formally ended, long lot patterns and place names endure across Quebec's rural landscape, and the system shaped landholding practices well into the 19th century. Next subtitle: Canada's Road to Serfdom. Given the fact that Quebec has never known individual liberty under English common law, why should we wonder that Canada itself still suffers from this legacy? Why? This is especially so given the fact that Quebec insisted should remain a separate nation within the Dominion of Canada, but demands the rest of the nation fund its inherent failures to modernize. This failure is accompanied by a toxic loathing of Anglo-Canada. So, we must dare to ask, where did Quebec's tyranny originate? From France, of course. To quote famed British historian Dr. David Starkey, all the worst ideas are French. Whether we are to talk about William the Bastard of Normandy, France, who brought feudalism to England, or the feudal habitants of Quebec, whose adoration of the Catholic Church and slavery under Quebec's seigneurial system, the Québécois have currently merely exchanged one form of tyranny for another totalizing monster: love of big government. They whine about how they've been victimized by Anglo-Canada, yet they have managed to do that all by themselves. Despite this, they persist with a grievance narrative that makes them feel justified in raping the nation to fund their giant welfare project, because that's what Quebec is. It's also worth noting that the biggest centralizing, heavy-handed wastrels that Canada has ever seen were raised as Catholics, including Pierre Trudeau and his, many view, his illegitimate son, Justin Trudeau, and currently Mark Carney, all Catholics. Canada was historically freer and more prosperous under Protestant leadership. As a radical low church believer, yes, radical, since I recognize the danger of denominationalism itself as a threat to primitive Christianity, I believe church fellowships ought to be autonomous, indigenous, and self-governing bodies expressing Christ in every locale where Christian believers gather. This expression of Christianity will ensure the freedom in Christ which was promised to us in the Scriptures. So I provide an image. You'll see it both in the blog and as the cover photo for the vlog I'm recording. Here's an image of what Roman Catholics did to God-fearing folk who believed the individual must know God for themselves. Up to 30,000 Huguenots were murdered at the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre alone. Catholicism has always associated itself with the globalist elite. By embracing it, you'll only exchange one slave master for another. From Galatians chapter 5, verse 1, from the New American Standard Bible. It was for freedom that Christ set us free. Therefore, keep standing firm, and do not be subject again to a yoke of slavery. This is a warning to my fellow countrymen. I hope you consider these things to be thoughtful, not inflammatory, because that wasn't my intent. I only seek to state the truth. God bless you all.